Thanks so much.
Cool. Thank you. Right, can you all hear me? There we go, I think the mic just needs to be really, really close. Well, I should just start by saying thank you to Cardiff University, really, for offering Little Cymru this platform and an opportunity for us to have our stories heard. Particularly stories from marginalised LGBTQ plus people, an opportunity to learn from stories that are important globally. You'll notice that I use the word globally as opposed to locally, or perhaps I should also say this is global as opposed to Western. And the reason, incidentally, I bring that up is because I was having a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine recently, and he asked me what I thought was an interesting question, which perhaps came up in the minds of some of you over here, is why would people in the West, and the West I mean, the West that has made so much progress in terms of giving LGBTQ people rights, why would people be interested in the voices of minorities that are perhaps not representative of the majority? And part of me was like, oh, that's a bit of an annoying question, but I thought, surely that's going to be a question that's going to come up in the minds of people that perhaps might not say it, but they might be thinking it. And the reason why I thought it was an important question is because it's a reminder of how, when progress has been made historically, it's so easy to sort of let our guard down, and how anti-LGBTQ sentiments are always on the margins, they're on the fringes, and if we let our guard down, it's so easy for them to creep in. And now more than ever, because we live in an interconnected world, it's very easy for this pluralistic world we live in, where there are different belief systems, there are different ideologies. It's hard to make sense of it all, and yet we have to, because as I said, our world is more interconnected than it's ever been. And I don't think it's unintentional that many people have sort of almost let the reality of our world slip away. I do think it's a failure of our education system, which is ironic because we are in a higher education institution. The reason I say that is because I firmly believe that a good education system is one that doesn't just prepare us to be tested, but it prepares us to be global citizens that have a moral duty to be able to be connected to humanity at a global level, not just at a local level. Now, I was having to think about what else I wanted to say today, but I think as someone who is not a social scientist, and I'm certainly not a politician, I want you to consider why it is that the state of our world is so linked to LGBTQ rights. Consider that all of us over here, I'm making an assumption over here, and do raise your hand if you think I'm wrong, is believe in democracy. And I'd like to say inclusive democracy. Why am I saying inclusive democracy? Because of course you can have an exclusive system where just the 1% of the rich and powerful have a meaningful say in how things are run. Does that sound familiar? And that's the world we see today. We see a world where people think that legitimate structures are those where we raise our walls, where we think that we're allowed to just be isolationist and inherently nationalistic. And that is the world we're living in today. A lot of the efforts that have been made by ourselves and our colleagues through history and currently, a lot of those efforts can often fall on deaf ears. Now, I'd like to read a quick quote, if I may, in an article I read by Ari Shaw, who was a senior fellow and the head of international programs at the Williams Institute at UCLA in the US, which highlights something fundamentally important. A 2018 study by colleagues at the Williams Institute at UCLA School of Law found that inclusion of sexual and gender minorities in a country's laws and policies are strongly associated with the level of democracy, the rule of law, and a free press. Democracy is often seen as a precondition for advances on LGBTQ rights. Aspects of liberal democracy, such as freedom of assembly and expression, enable LGBTQ rights organizations to mobilize and press for greater inclusion. While democracy alone may be insufficient to produce accepting environments, there are no non-democracies that have strong rights and protections for sexual and gender minorities. And if I may, I'd like to highlight two key statistics that will help contextualize that statement. Currently, there are 64 countries around the world which have laws that criminalize homosexuality, many of which can be traced back to European colonization. In some countries such as Brunei, Iran, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Uganda, and in the northern states and Nigeria, people can be sentenced to death for same-sex sexual acts. And in the US, which is considered the crowning jewel in Western democracy, they consider themselves to be leaders of the free world, whatever that may be. Just in 2023, 546 anti-LGBTQ bills were proposed in the US state legislature. So, for those of us who believe in inclusive democracy, there is a job of work to be done. Now, before I hand over to our panelists who are far more capable than I am to lead this conversation, I'd like to play a short audio clip of a conversation I had with a Cardiff University student who'd like to remain anonymous for safety reasons about their experience of being gay in Iran. And the reason I like to play that because it highlights the role that the UK can play and Western democracies can play in being nations of sanctuary and being able to provide opportunities for people to have their stories heard where otherwise they'd be silenced, they'd fade into oblivion. And this is a story that really is worth hearing. So I'd like to play that, if I may. If you guys can just let me know if you can hear this.
So what was the experience like growing up as a gay man in Iran?
Growing up as a gay man in Iran was difficult. In our culture, trans people are represented, and in our society today, we have a lot of trans actors and actresses, trans activists and NGOs dealing with trans people. However, being gay is very frowned upon, and gay people are completely invisible. Practicing same-sex or any homosexual activity is illegal and is prosecutable. In school and in most of the public places, I was othered because I was more feminine than the other boys. And in the good days, I was looked at as that funny guy, and in the bad days, I was bullied.
And being in Iran as a gay person, did you try to talk to someone to receive help, to receive support? And if you did, what was that like?
Yeah, as a teen, I used to go to a youth counselor regularly to deal with the anxiety that I had because of all of the bullying and everything that kept on going. After a while, I told my counselor that I am indeed attracted to guys, and I'm not just feminine. My therapist told me that being interested in men is just a bad habit, just like smoking, and I can learn to unlearn this habit with willpower and a bit of practice. This went on for a while, and whenever I tried to challenge him and bringing up questions of like, why can't being gay be normal, just like being trans? Like, why is it so different? He used to say that you need to understand that from a medical perspective, homosexuality is in the same rank as pedophilia. So you need to always remember this when you want to falter and fall back into your homosexual habits. This comparison, the comparison of homosexuality with pedophilia, was something that stayed with me for a very long time, even after when I came out. It just got me into this very unhelpful thought cycle that was quite difficult to break from.
And it must have taken a lot to actually evolve from that point of of torture that you went through, that psychological torture, to where you are now, and reflecting on that, if you don't mind, what do you think, therefore, LGBTQ History Month means to you? Why do you think it's so important, given what you've been through?
I know that there are a lot of kids out there right now who are going through the same thing as I was going through as a kid and as a teenager. And kids like me need to see example of gay people who are successful, reputable, healthy, and can interact with other people in the society as a normal being, as just like other people. And this way, when these kids see these examples, it will help them break out of this entrapment that they're in, and they'll break through this mental cycle.
So with that sobering story in mind, I'd like to turn to our panelists, and I'd like to echo the question which I asked the Cardiff University student of, what LGBTQ History Month means to you. And of course, please do introduce yourself, because we'd love to know more about you. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what LGBTQ History Month means to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Alicia, I pronounce her she, they. I'm a fat, queer, non-binary, autistic person. I happen to be the training and education officer for Greater Cymru. And I'm genderqueer, and I am queer with my sexual identity as well. So I'm going to say something very obvious, but LGBTQ History Month means a lot because we need to see ourselves somewhere. I am Alpha Egyptian, but I was raised in Italy, and for so long I didn't realize that I could be not what was expected of me in terms of sexuality, in terms of gender. So hearing stories and having visibility is fundamental, because until we have examples, we just know to walk the path that others have decided for us, because that's the box. So that's my answer to that.
Hi everyone, I'm Shana, pronouns are she, they. I'm actually a student at Cardiff University reading religion and theology, and I'm also a Unitarian minister in training. For me, LGBT History Month is an opportunity to increase visibility for global majority LGBT folks. We exist, and we have existed for millennia. Being queer isn't a white or Western ideology, as is often portrayed in mainstream media, and it's not a modern day thing. Romantic diversity and other genders have existed in every documented culture, whether that was accepted or not. And even Pride celebrations tend to be quite white-centric, even when it was a black trans woman who started the riots when the police raid happened in New York. And I suppose to highlight the fact that in cultures from Albania to Afghanistan, people have raised children as a different gender to what they were assigned at birth. There have been female husbands in Kenya, Two-Spirit Native American folks. So yeah, all of that has existed, and I think one of the important things, as Nomer mentioned earlier, to highlight is the impact, or the negative impact, on colonialism, because people have existed, and there was respect, but it was when these explorers or settlers went across the world, their view of what masculine norms were, for example, in India, with the Hijra community, that crushed their idea of what masculinity was. And I think it's important to highlight in India specifically, the Criminal Tribes Act 1871 came in by the British rule in India, which meant that gender expression and homosexuality was illegal and punishable. And it's only a few years back that the Supreme Court in India quashed that, changed that law. But even with that, that's not true liberation, because the ideas in that culture of it being illegal still exist. So that's a long answer, but I think it's important to highlight those things.
Hello everyone, my name is Jen. I'm originally from Malaysia, I'm a Malaysian-born Chinese person. I do identify myself as a non-binary person, and my pronouns are they, them. I do consider myself as trans, but more on the trans femme side. So to answer your question, Sima, what does LGBTQ plus History Month mean to you? I put it down on paper because I'm ADHD. Go blind. Anyway, it means a month of privilege recognition and status quo introspection, whether one is queer or not. For example, which queer person has to die for me to enjoy what they considered as privilege back in their days, even up until today. Also, it's a month of recognizing and acknowledging the yet ongoing struggles to which queer person are still facing. Case in point, Brianna Gay, 16-year-old trans girl who was bullied to her death. Next, Benedict, 16-year-old Two-Spirit Native American bullied to their death. That only happened recently. To some, this is a month of advocating for LGBTQ plus matters, but rather than confining such activities to this month only, this month should serve mainly as a reminder that people suffered and died because they just wanted to be themselves.
Thank you. So, just to sort of delve into the themes that all of you have touched upon a little bit, I'd like to begin, if I may, with a theme that I find particularly interesting. Growing up in an Islamic Republic, a major theme that perhaps some of you are familiar with is that religion often can come into conflict with people's sexuality. And as a theology student and someone studying religion, I'm just curious to hear what your experience was like learning about religion and how that relates to your journey as a queer person, but more broadly, what have you learned about the relationship between religion and being LGBTQ+. I know that's a big question, but just if we can scratch the surface there.
Thanks, Mima. Yeah, it is a big question and a lot for this very short lunchtime discussion. I think it's important to start to share that anything I say is my experience, and we're all unique with our experiences, particularly in your relationship with religion. And just to reiterate what Shab said at the start, if anything feels uncomfortable, I won't be offended. Just go and have your space, whatever you need to do. I also grew up Muslim, and I said I'm training as a 10 minister, but I grew up Muslim, and yeah, that was incredibly challenging. As I'm sure it has been for many people, whatever their faith is. But one of the things that happened for me through the challenge, I went on pilgrimage to Mecca. I was going to say 2017, but it wasn't, it was way before that. But and it was actually through that experience that I found acceptance, because what happened when I got there and I'm in the Grand Mosque and I'm praying, like nothing struck me down. Like I wasn't like suddenly like thunderbolts and like you're gay, you shouldn't be here, like get up. That didn't happen. You know, and it's all these things I was hearing before that, like that you can't be religious, whatever that religion is, and gay just doesn't go together. So that was my personal experience, and after that experience of like, oh wait, nothing actually happened to me. I thought actually the relationship I have with a divine source is my relationship, So that gave me the confidence not only to continue that, but also gave me the confidence in my queerness. So I think I was quite closeted, even if I was, knew I was gay. It just gave me a sense of confidence to do that. But in terms of, for example, scripture, I know that is challenging for some people, and some things that I've said, people could easily argue, well, that's your interpretation. But I think it is important to recognise things like, so I'm just looking at my notes, Sharia law, for example. I'm not an expert in Sharia law, but one of the things that I did read about when I was younger is that countries that exercise Sharia law say that it's based on religion. It's not, it's the country having their own laws and saying that it's Sharia law. So then people who practice Islam will be like, oh, I can't, it's against Islam. But actually, if we were to go into it, and you'd have to really read quite a lot of books on law and things like that to recognise actually a lot of what's in some countries' legislation doesn't exist in scripture. So it's sort of like making laws up and saying this is Sharia law. Also, one of the things I think is important in Abrahamic faiths, when they talk about creation of Adam and Eve, that is a translation. I think it's important to think of, as someone who's actually a Hebrew scholar and translating text myself, I wouldn't say that I'm translating, I would say I'm interpreting something. There's a big difference. I'm looking at text and I'm interpreting from my perspective, and yes, I do look at things with a queer lens and think, actually, they were a bit gay, and this is why. So, and some people might argue, saying, no, you're putting that. And someone who's homophobic will say, will give their stance. So everything's up to interpretation. But I think it is important to share. For example, there's a translator or interpreter, Sheikh Muhammad Sarwar. His version of the Quran, talking about creation of Adam and Eve, or man and woman. Those words don't actually exist. Adam, Eve. One interpretation might be suitable partner, and his interpretation is it's a God who created you from a single soul, and out of it made its spouse to bring it comfort. So there's no binary language there. So that is something that could be argued, and again, having studied Hebrew, it's similar. There isn't a specific, this is a woman, they do name that. I'm not sure if you want to say much more at this point.
We'll pause there. I must say I was quite impressed. I didn't know you'd been for a pilgrimage. I've known you for a while now. I didn't know you'd been to Mecca. I want to know more about that later. Yeah, because that's something I was actually thinking of doing, but I was nervous about it. It's interesting that you went there and you almost overcame that nervousness and anxiety, whereas for me, what stopped me, I was like, my goodness, I'm going to be in a swarming mass of people who might be hostile towards me, so that's quite interesting. Slightly shifting gears, I'd like to bring the focus back on the value of education. I mentioned earlier on that I do think a good education is one that teaches people to be critical thinkers and understand humanitarianism from a holistic point of view. So I'm curious, as someone who has been involved with educational campaigns with Cymru, what you think, Alicia, about the value of education in activism, in coming to terms with some of the challenges the LGBTQ plus community faces. Once again, big question, I appreciate it, but let's see if we can scratch the surface.
So this comes at a perfect timing because something horrible happened yesterday. And I was like, oh, this is a little fire under my bum. So, tiny background. My first experience in university was in Italy, and I was the only student that wasn't white. The current dean of that university, who is, I cannot express in words how important he is in the country, is part of the permanent jury of the Venice Biennale. I was studying media. So he is cinema in Italy. He makes or breaks things. And the level of honor and humbleness that just being in his presence was, it's something of value that you can say you studied with him. A few months ago I found him on Instagram, and it was very interesting. I followed him and I left him a message that was just insensate, like everybody recognizes his value, so the honor that has been being your student professor. And I was genuinely emotional when he liked that comment. And yesterday I noticed that he makes a post with Julie Andrews as Mary Poppins. And in the post is just absolutely livid that apparently here in the UK we have censored Mary Poppins for children now. That is actually factually not true. The rating changed from U, which is universal for everyone, to PG, parental guidance, advised, not mandatory. But he made it sound like that. Because there is a racial slur in it of colonial time. When the two children go back home, they are painted black from the chimneys, so the general uses a slur. And that's the reason why the rating was changed. But he said that now it's been censored, and going on this way, we won't be able to call people from Paris Parisians, because that also used to be a term that you use for snob intellectuals. False equivalence if I've ever seen one. And every single person in the comments was, again, I cannot stress how important this person is, and he's the head of this very important university. And all of a sudden, reading this made me realize every single instance of racism that I had to pass off as a joke, every single professor of his own university that made fun of my surname when they had to say it, calling me to have an exam. Some people just literally saying, I'm not saying that, what's your first name, I'll call you by your first name. All those instances weren't outliers like I tried to tell myself, and while being grateful of being there and being their student, they were supported by that kind of behavior that comes from up. And this person, again, I have a hard time believing that it's ignorance, not understanding the difference in ratings. So, was it just bad fate? And everybody supporting that was listening to this person that everybody looks up to, that fosters this kind of behavior. So, even just the education of, we don't use those terms anymore. And if you just leave a child watching that film without parental guidance, child love repetition. So let's just repeat that. Why should it be a bad word? So that instance that happened yesterday made me realize it's not just that we're here to learn and to meet different people, and thankfully that broadens our horizons, but it means a lot, the example that we give, the openness that we have. And if we don't have those conversations in university, where? So that's a little tale for you.
Thank you. It was very moving. Thank you for that. And I guess it reminds us how people in higher education are also in a position of power. We often view academics in the sort of benign context, don't we? These sort of politically neutral, sterile beings that aren't political, that don't have opinions and prejudices, but that's not quite so. So I'm staying on the topic of higher education. I'm curious to hear your experience, Gian, about being an international student. You know, what was that experience like, being in higher education, being in university as a queer person? If you could expand on that experience for us.
First of all, I'm a graduate of University of South Wales. As a non-binary person, I really like the idea of having gender-neutral bathroom that they have in all their campuses. I definitely felt more included, and my needs were considered in the university floor plan design. That is, of course, like the facility side of things. On top of that, I feel like it's also quite imperative for universities to make clear of its non-transphobic and racist and queerphobic policy within its premises by implementing safer space rules. throughout the campus. I feel like this is a step to making its LGBTQ plus students, especially international students that aren't as familiar with the social political background of the country, to feel like they don't need to adapt their queer identities in a new or unfamiliar environment. But for this, I don't mean just putting like pride flags up and call it done, but it's more like through engagement, through clear communications to students and staff alike, and provide assistance where it is needed. But as compared to my times back in Malaysia when I was in college there, of course, like being queer was like something that's not out in the open. But obviously I look very queer, so people just come up to me like, hey, are you that? But yeah, I am. But it's more open here, of course, like they have the pride flags up in university premises, like something like that over there. It definitely makes us feel a little bit more included, but it's not something that I saw in Malaysia. So if we have more of that in the university premises, I feel like that is a start to make people feel a bit more included. Yeah.
Brilliant. So, slightly changing tactics, because all of us are part of a grassroots organisation, Glitter Cymru. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Glitter Cymru during the comfort stop in a bit. But effectively, and I'll just in brief to provide a little bit of context before we launch into a discussion. It is a grassroots LGBTQ organisation, a community group for minoritized LGBTQ individuals. So it could include asylum seekers, people who are refugee, international students, people who spend most of their life in the UK. And I remember when Vish, the founder, a dear friend of mine, when he came up with the idea of glitter over a very insipid soya latte I was having with him. One of the questions I had, and since I have been able to answer, but I'll ask the question nonetheless, is being LGBTQ plus, you are a minority. You're a minority. And then being non-white, POC, or call it what you will, it's another minority. You're a minority within a minority. Why the heck are you creating a group that is just for LGBTQ plus ethnic minority people in the UK? Wouldn't that work against you in some sense? Why not try to integrate with a wider LGBTQ plus community? So I'm just curious to hear, because you've all been so instrumental with Glitter Cymru. I'm just curious to know, why do you think groups like this, they are marginal groups, but why are they important? What does it mean to you? What has your experience been like? What has a community group like Glitter meant for you? I appreciate it's a personal question, so
So because I love bringing receipts before I give you my personal take, Professor Stephanie Davis, Queer and Intersex People of Color in the UK, seminal book. She brought together all the studies and reasons to explain why there's a double marginalization and why, as people of color, we are marginalized from the LGBT community, and why, as LGBT people, we are marginalized in our own references communities. I'll leave her work to speak as to why those two marginalization are there and compound, and why there's a need for expressing our experiences, because otherwise it's the issue with white feminism in a way. Like we only think about one thing when we should think in intersectional terms, and multiple marginalizations compound in different ways. Glitter is, in my experience, necessary because personally, I'm not using the term lightly, kind of saved my life. Because I moved to Cardiff 6 years ago, I think. I've been in the UK almost 20 years now. But in the LGBTQ community, the expectation and standard was a bit different for me. So I always felt like I was looking in from the outside, and I was raised by the white side of my family, so there's a lot of ignorance of my own, that I was just like, I know that white people don't treat me exactly like they treat each other, but I can't quite put my finger on it. So having a place where I can interact and understand and learn from my siblings and from experiences that have been denied to me, it's just invaluable, because otherwise, without that kind of connection, I'll be very honest, if I had remained in Italy, I wouldn't have got as old as I have. It's just a matter of fact. And examples like the one that I brought before, they explain why. Then one wouldn't think, because they're supposed to be Western and modern, and part of Europe, and that I say there's a lot that doesn't get out because it doesn't get translated. So the importance of grassroots communities like Glitter is basically the new political black, which was something that existed from the 70s to the 90s, if you're not aware, and was basically taking awareness from the fact that as non-white people, we share a struggle, and that included black people, that included brown people, that included Asian people, because sharing this struggle and considering the words that the government uses for us, which is BAME, which is black, and minority ethnic, and so taking everything together, there are issues in defining our identities within that, but realistically we share a struggle, so I feel that things like Glitter bring back part of that political black that helps in global liberation, because admittedly we are the global majority, and unifying for liberation and equity seems a good thing to do at this time in time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Yeah, I agree with what you've just shared about the struggles. There's a sense of affinity and understanding when you're with specifically, what term people like to use. I like to use global majority, queer people, especially when we've been in a lot of white spaces. You mentioned why we want to put ourselves in this, minoritizing more. And some people might argue there's segregation there, but and I know a black friend of mine, especially 4 years ago after the death of George Floyd, they were focusing on more black or POC spaces, and again there's this question of segregation. But actually it's about having safe spaces, and those spaces are needed if people need healing. And yes, as queer people, regardless of our ethnicity, there's a struggle, particularly possible struggle with family and acceptance. However, with if you're a person of colour, that I feel, this is my opinion, that struggle is worse in many ways, and when religion comes into it as well. So to be, in my experience, to be able to talk to somebody else, even just now, you said, the pilgrimage thing, I want to know more. If I was speaking to that to somebody who wasn't Muslim, not South Asian, would they have been like, I'm curious to know more? It might, so there's something there about having people who are similar to us.
To answer your questions, I think I'm going to use an example from our recent experience. It is important to have organizations like Lit covering that showcases stories of global majority peoples, because people feel seen and they feel like their stories is reflected more accurately and realistically. For example, I've recently created an event, or organized an event, Drag Fest, and that is a celebration of queer people that are also of EC descent, and that is shorthand for East and Southeast Asian heritage. So we showcase stories about queer and EC people. During the event, a lot of people came up to us and they told us thank you. They really appreciated the idea, the concept of it, and how it was actually executed. And many people came up to us and said that they felt seen, they felt like there's a sense of community. I think the sense of community is something that's really important, rather than just fitting or assimilating into a bit bigger pictures so wide and big that you feel like you have lost seeing where you are in that picture. So it's important to have this kind of organization and event so that people feel like their stories are there and their stories are relatable. They can see themselves in this event and this space.
Thank you. Just Just because I'm mindful of time, I should ask Shab, has the food arrived?
I don't know if you can smell it.
No. So that's a yes, I'm assuming. Before we have a comfort stop, and there'll be an opportunity for our audience member to engage with the panelists, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about Glitter Cymru, not just as a plug, but just to tell you a bit more about the sort of work we've done and why, as a grassroots organisation, we really can use support. So we are not funded by the government, no industries really support us. We pretty much rely on the charity of others, and that could be you. We do have a website. If you are genuinely interested in what it is we're doing, whether it's helping asylum seekers or refugees, people who might be homeless, people who are struggling to feed themselves because they have children, because they struggle with their mental health, all the money that you may contribute, even if it's £5 or £2, we do have a GoFundMe active link on our website. So if you believe in our work, and if you believe in what it is we're doing, please do look us up, and please do donate in some way or the other. And I know people often get a little uncomfortable when it comes to donations, but the world we live in, it's very hard to help people without financial contributions. So that's not just a plug. As the treasurer of Glitter Cymru, I know what that money is used for, so I can stand behind it. So that's just something to consider. If you feel as if this doesn't relate to you in some way, it does. This is something all of us can be involved with in some way or the other. Before we have a comfort stop, and that might give you an opportunity to think about any questions you may wish to ask, and we'll talk a little bit about the community guidelines in relation to the Q&A, I'd just like to end on a little bit of a reflective note of what, as LGBTQ History Month, which I say LGBTQ History Month comes to an end, but time doesn't come to an end. Every day should be a day that is humanistic and global in its integration of people regardless of their identity. Is what do you think should be a takeaway message for our audience here today? And what's going on in your mind? What are you feeling at this time? It could be a sentence or two, or even longer. What are you thinking of?
Don't be silent. When you hear a homophobic joke, a racist joke, it's not just a joke. Call it out. Because when we stay silent, we silently allow it to go on, and the cycle needs to break. So if you have one takeaway, don't be silent. And allyship matters because when you have any level of privilege, if you're a straight person, if you're a cis person, if you're a white person, and you are in the presence of a joke like that, even if no queer person or person of color is around, for you to stand up, your voice matters more. Because of the white cis patriarchal society we live in, your voice will always matter more than ours. So where you decide to spend that privilege matters. Privilege is not something to be ashamed of, but if you are aware of it, you can use it to help those who don't have it.
Thank you. What came to my mind is maybe I gave a sort of a very quick whistle-stop tour earlier about some history, and I would suggest, if you haven't, just to educate yourself a little bit more about queer history in the global south, I guess, and particularly the impact of colonialism.
Rather than messages, I think I would just like to ask the audiences to ask themselves, why should this matter to you? How does this concern you? I understand you might not be directly affected by the struggles of others, but we do live in the same social political climate, and our people's struggles can be yours too someday, should there be a change in the social political landscape. But in a way, I'm encouraging radical empathy, but also it is also your responsibility to educate yourself rather than having other people to educate you. I think that should come from your own initiative rather than relying on other people to make you make you understand the world. Yeah.
Thank you. I like that term, radical empathy. That was a nice term. As far as radicalism is concerned, I think that's one we can all get behind. So if you don't mind, we'll take a 5-10 minute comfort stop. And it'll be an opportunity for you guys to freshen up, have water, have tea, have coffee, think about any questions that you may have. If there are any questions, you could write them down anonymously on the sticky notes and put them in the plastic boxes over there and hand them to us. Or if you're brave enough, you can just raise your hand and you can just project your voice and ask the question. If there are no questions, then we can just eat food. But if we just pause for 5 minutes to just reflect on any questions that you may have. Is that okay, everyone? Yeah? Thank you very much. Back in 5 minutes. Okay, everyone. Are we all back? Sufficiently refreshed? No, that's not working. Yes, it's working. Anyone? Yeah? Can you hear me? All right, brilliant. So, these are the community guidelines for Q&A, but it's not an exhaustive list, but basically you can either ask a question anonymously or you can raise your hand and you can ask a question. In summary, just be respectful, don't invalidate anyone's personal experiences, and we will try our best to answer any questions, but we reserve the right to say that, look, we can't answer the question or we're not comfortable to answer that question, but please do engage with us. That's why we're here. It's an opportunity to discuss any burning questions that you may have for us. And as chair, I'll also try my best to answer questions, or we can signpost if we feel as if we don't have the answers. So if anyone has any questions or comments for that matter, please just raise your hand and project your voice so we can bring one of the roving mics back to you. So, do we have any questions, any comments, any complaints? Oh, Chezzy, yeah?
Come on over.
Just very quickly, if I can say, there was a very interesting study conducted in this journal, which said that in a Q&A setting, if a woman is the first person, someone who identifies as a woman is the first person to ask the question, you're much more likely to get questions asked thereafter than if the first person who asked the question is a man. And they showed that to be true in the majority of cases. It was statistically significant for the scientists amongst us. But sorry, carry on, Chelsea, no pressure.
No pressure felt, but I hope you're personally either. Firstly, thank you very much for sharing your experiences and talking to us today. I really thought it was really great to hear from you, so thank you very much. My question is more from the fact that we're coming from an academic building right now at Cardiff University, and from my own educating and learning about this space. I'm trying to educate myself in the language that gets used and deprogramming using words that get used quite regularly in academic. For example, I'm a scientist, like stakeholder, and the colonial background that comes from some of those words. So I'm just kind of coming to ask a question about what we can do really to raise more awareness about actual language being inclusive, and the history and the meaning behind certain words, and trying what we can do to educate others about why we shouldn't be using certain languages, and coming from that perspective, given that for example that word gets used in government, it gets used by a lot of different parties. Really, how can we go about making change to make people feel more included? And I guess that's my question.
Yeah, sure.
I think this is really important about, I'm not an expert in what people should be called or not called, but like earlier you mentioned this, the BAME thing, and as far as I know that was like a word to use because people don't want to use black. And it's often the white people who come up with these terms, and then we just go along with it. It's like, for example, why do we go along with it? Because we didn't choose those words. So I don't have an answer, but that's just a thought of someone comes up with a term. It's not usually the people of colour or who come up with the terms, and so it was interesting when I heard about the BAME word, and it's like, we don't want to say black, so we'll say this instead.
I think it's just like to answer your question. I feel like it's like going to what you said about like not wanting to say black. Some people find it. Some people might think that it's offensive to say the word flag, but I think it's really just about the intention. For example, instead of using like people of color, nowadays we're using global majority, and like instead of saying people that I don't know. What's the word? I don't know, but like we can also use something like maybe like a service user, that someone is seeking for help maybe, I think it's just really about the intention, how you frame and contextualize your word. Yeah.
On that matter, I will mention this. I think culturally we're still a bit stuck for habit or for unconscious bias on the idea of dark and light, shadow and light, like the work of Carl Jung being called shadow work. Is because there's still the idea of something dark being bad and something light being good. So I think working to try and rework this inner belief in a lot of terms might, it's a lot of work because it's habit, but some of those meanings are stuck in that sense of black versus white beyond the description of people, because it's been going on since the 1600s at this point. So, yeah.
Just quickly, something I mentioned earlier on about the idea of what a good education system constitutes. Typically, the education systems that we're familiar with are education systems where people are trained to be tested. They're products. We're not necessarily educated to be critical thinkers. And I think part of the issue there is to be a critical thinker requires us to challenge institutions. And that includes higher education systems or people in power, and because we are social beings, that is always going to be a challenge. So good education is fundamental, and I think that has to start at a primary level, because they're inherently curious, they're annoyingly curious, they constantly ask why, and somehow that's drummed out of us. We're sort of taught to conform. So we do have that in us. There is an inherent nature, but I do think the education system sort of beats it out of us. And I think all of us can relate to it to some extent. So I think at a very fundamental level is just having a better education system, which is more humanitarian focused. And just as a scientist, you're well aware of how easy it is to have the sciences versus the humanities. There's almost like a stark line in between, which is just, I mean, frankly, it's just total BS. Is because, like, why? Is, just that critical thinking, the ability to ask questions should be global. It's not unique to the sciences, it's not unique to the humanities or the arts. It should be it should be for everyone. Education should be for everyone, because everyone has the right to ask questions and learn. Yeah. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Sorry, Anna, can I just add to that point as well? And it's a really, really important question. Just from in terms of the work that I'm working on at the moment with the Race Equality Charter. So terminology does come up often, and it's just in terms of Cardiff University, it's that taking that approach across all the communications, and that's something that we are looking into reviewing at the moment. Because as you all know, the landscape is constantly changing, words like BAME no longer acceptable to use, and what actually fits with what people want. And we have to remember that identity and how we, obviously identity, that is a very personal choice, and Shani and other members of the GLIT committee were global majority, whereas some people prefer minoritized ethnics. That kind of reflects on the systems and structures that we've put in place that make people minoritized within this community. So it's always kind of in flux, and it's kind of working out what works for generally the kind of community we have at Cardiff University. But that's an ongoing conversation that constantly needs to be reviewed. To be in line with what's going on in society as a whole. But yeah, in terms of what, as a higher education, that's something that we are reviewing at the moment. But just a little insight into how to move things forward. And that is, we get that from looking at surveys, we get that from doing focus groups and things like that, and listening to what people actually want. And the point that you raised around who actually comes with these terms. And I think in terms of Cardiff University looking at terminology that we use at the moment is in line with government in terms of the anti-racist words action plan. But just thinking about who came up with that terminology, who was in power when they chose this phrasing. So that's something, we've got to challenge ourselves and reflect on that as well. And it's about what we want as a community moving forward.
Absolutely. Do we have any other questions, or do we have any other comments that we'd like to make? Ah, yes.
I think just note, just kind of wanting to get your opinion on another specific part of that, is do you ever feel that sometimes when we're trying to come up with new terms that replace ones that we find to be problematic, we create other problems by the new terms that we use? For example, with global majority, that then presents non-white as a monolith rather than the individual and distinct cultures that are represented under global majority. Yeah.
So indeed, something again that I would easily motivate to is the work of Stephanie Davis on that, and something that I mentioned before about political blackness, which used to be a thing. And I do, usually the spectrum is everybody that isn't white is black in that sense, because despite our heritage differences and our different cultures, we have the same struggle in a world that is white and patriarchal. So the issue of the breakdown of political blackness happened because the government basically made it a point of different heritage groups to have different priorities. And so for people of South Asian extract, it started to become more and more problematic to basically have relatives move here, while at the same time the problem for people of Black and Caribbean heritage started to become the lack of funding for youths that then became an issue for how easily prey of the prison system that they became. So giving different priorities is a divide and conquer that has been done by the white supremacist culture. So I very much agree that I think that's possibly the reason why then things like Little Cymru are so important, because as much as they invite everybody from the global majority to come, then there are indeed subgroups. And then I've met people of Egyptian heritage that I never met someone Egyptian. I've never been to Egypt. So as long as those spaces are there, then we can indeed like have our references. But in the current climate of the world, without a unified front, I cannot see a breakdown of the white supremacist culture personally, but that's my take.
I can add to that. Just strictly speaking from a linguistic perspective, we were talking about language, and language is an ever-changing tool. It is an ever-changing tool for us to understand the world and how we perceive them. And it's not to suggest that it's perfect. So, for example, like you mentioned, like if we create a new term, does it mean that there's going to be another issue that's going to come up from using the word? And there's also another issue. I mean, like the new problem is a new problem. Like whatever that comes with that is something that we can scrutinize upon. For example, to use the use of pronouns. For example, like they/them pronouns, which I use, people find it to be bizarre and strange to use they/them pronouns because it's plural of nature, but that is a flaw in the English language itself because, for example, in Chinese or in Malay, such pronouns or the idea of pronouns doesn't exist. So I think it's something to think about.
And just a quick pointer, if I may, is this idea of a new label or a new identity, if there can be such a thing. If that presents itself with problems, I often ask people who complain about labels, oh my goodness, we have to remember about a label. I often ask people, okay, let's go back to something more fundamental, is just basic human rights. Have we met those at a global level? It's like, fine, let's ignore identities. Let's go back to basic human rights. Let's just read the UN Charter of Fundamental Human Rights. Have we met those? The answer is a resounding no. So identities is the least of our worries. I mean, we can't solve basic things that in theory we should be able to solve, like poverty, for example, or world hunger. You know, we have enough food to go around, and people are having a Twitter fit over the fact that they can't label themselves in a way that's appropriate. I'm like, that's the least of your worries, honey. It's like, just, you know, if you just... So, to me, the way I often respond to that, I'm like, is that really what you're worried about? You know, if people are more worried about labels than they are basic human needs, I often think, look, you are in no moral stance just what is your stance on something more basic than that, and how have you contributed towards the security? And I don't even want to talk about that unless someone hasn't given me their perspective on something more fundamental. And because normally that stops them in their tracks. Then they're like, okay, perhaps I don't want to talk about labels right now. So I often take a step back. I'm like, let's start with something even more basic, before we go into something more philosophical and more holistic than that. I'm like, well, have you dealt with basic human rights? If the answer is no, I'm like, not interested. So, and that's my 2 cents. Any other questions and comments before the smell of pizza wafts over us and we are...
So first of all, thank you for the experiences that you've shared from different areas as well, and culturally as well. I was really connecting with what Alicia was saying in terms of what happened with the theme, and it's something that happens very often when you're in the academic level, when you're studying, you're looking up for people and you're thinking that they should be a good example. And I was also thinking in terms of other areas, because that happens also in a social environment, in terms of social media, that they need also resources that you use in other areas, because sometimes you just don't want to get involved, or you just don't want to say something about it because you're already exhausted from wearing the activism hat every time. So are there any other resources or tools that you find useful to when that situation happens and maybe you want to say what you need to say in that moment rather than just avoiding it for next time, which it happens quite often?
Yeah, for play on the, if you go to the Instagram of Glitter, we have a link tree there. And every workshop and training that I've personally curated has all the resources there. And there are books, there are films, there is TV stuff, there are Instagram accounts, there are TikTok accounts, I think, which you think, no, you don't get education from TikTok. But if all you have is a span attention of 30 seconds, there are accounts there that can at least direct you to, there's this bit of information, and then actually you should look more into it. But if you don't have the time, that's good enough. So yeah, that's a good starting point, if I may say so myself. Thank you.
I'll just quickly say something as an activist. If you identify as an activist, there's just something I think we have to fundamentally accept. It's a lifelong job, and it's often one that's not paid for. Because an activist is a humanitarian, and you never stop being one. I hope you don't. I don't. I don't expect to ever be satisfied. How can you? There are over 8 billion people. I can't represent over 8 billion people. All of us over here should be humanitarians at a fundamental level. So if I'm tired at the end of the day, I have the right to be. Because it's hard, it's difficult, and that's okay. I think we just need to acknowledge that this job is never done, is because, as I mentioned in my introductory remark, is there are over 8 billion ways to live a life. And all of them might be valid, but sometimes they conflict, which means our job is never done. And that's okay. It's okay to accept that you're tired and sometimes you're fed up, but don't give up, because the job is just not done, and it's okay to have a break but come back fighting, because there is a job of work to be done, and it's a long list. But as long as you start somewhere, because we all have to look ourselves in the mirror, we all have to live with our conscience, and any start is a start, really. As I said, just start with the basic human charter, or fundamental the UN human rights, and see how can we be involved in just that as a good starting point. I use that as an arbitrary starting point, but and then see how we can get involved. But it's a job for life, and we're all involved in that in some way or here. So don't just believe in yourself. Don't give up. I know that sounds saccharine. I know that sounds very fringe magnet philosophy, but there's something profound about that. That the job is never done. Thank you.
Also, sorry, I'm taking off somewhere. If I can say one thing to actually thank, that Cardiff is the first place that I've ever been that is so progressively active. So there's always someone to go ask, there's always someone that will not make you feel alone. And if nothing else, as in Glitter are there, we cater to be helpful and have meetings for queer people of color, but if we are there partially also to educate, like don't necessarily go to your friend of color asking them questions because maybe they have a lot of things to do throughout the day without having the time to educate, but we're there exactly for that. So there's no such thing as a stupid question ever, and if we can help, we're there.
Thank you. So now, this just leaves me to thank our panelists, Alicia, Shana, GM, Cardiff University, Shad. Thank you all so much, and thank you to the audience for being here and engaging with us. Thank you all so much, and yeah, we hope to see you again. Thank you.